everyone, and welcome to this first HapKey Fireside chat. And we're joined today by Henrik Kniberg. And before I introduce today's guest, just a little bit about me. So I'm Marcus Castenfors. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of HapKey. And HapKey is a simple survey tool that measures teams' happiness. And with me, I have the Henrik Kniberg. Henrik is an esteemed Agile coach, author, developer, and as of late, designer. Some of you might know him through the books Scrum and XP from the Trenches, and Kanban and Scrum Making the Most of Both, or as the creator of the fantastic animated videos Agile Product Ownership in a Nutshell and Spotify Engineering Culture. And for more than a decade, Henrik has been working closely with multinational corporations in their quest to become more nimble and agile, such as Lego, Spotify, and Mojang. And what I truly admire about Henrik is his ability to translate complexity to simplicity. Henrik has a way of explaining hard to grasp topics in simple ways. And for the next hour, we will explore a topic that Henrik and myself care deeply about, and that is the happiness of teams and organizations. So a warm welcome to Henrik for joining us, and also everyone online.
Fire burning my back right now.
And I have a set of questions, and obviously, please ask your questions in Slido, and we will have this fireside chat about happiness in teams and organizations. So the first question then, what does happiness in the workplace mean to you, Henrik?
Well, that's what would make me want to go to that workplace in the first place.
Right.
But from a very cynical perspective, I would say it means productivity. Just from a very practical, cynical perspective, happier teams just seem to build better stuff faster. To me, it goes a bit deeper than that. So to me, it's the purpose. I think if at least the workplaces I've been involved in trying to create, I've found if we focus on just making a place where people can be happy, then we get the other stuff kind of as a side effect. And there's also a selfish aspect to it. If I create a workplace where people are happy and then I go to that workplace, then it's easier for me to go home feeling refreshed instead of burned out or things like that.
Right. And what do you see are the characteristics of a happy team?
I would say one characteristic is how they deal with problems. I find that teams that are kind of happy or motivated, they tend to solve problems. They talk about them and they do stuff about it. Teams that are not very happy, they tend to either just ignore them, like, I don't care, not my problem, or I can't do anything about it anyway. Or they just complain about it. So
Thanks for that.
That's one characteristic. But I guess another is just the general atmosphere in the room. You walk into a team that's happy, they'll generally, they'll be joking around and asking how you are, and but teams that are not tend to be, you just notice they don't care about you. They're just sitting and doing their thing. And maybe half the team is really stressed and the other half is not asking. It can be pretty dismal sometimes.
And another question then. So could you tell a story of a team that you work closely with that went from unhappy to happy? And could you also expand a bit about that transition? So
I guess there's one really clear case comes to mind. I think that's when that was kind of my aha moment, realizing that this is a thing. Quite a while back, I was coaching a company in Stockholm, building like software, and there was like 3 teams I was working with, and we were doing kind of agile stuff and Scrum and similar. And I introduced this habit at every retrospective. So every 2 weeks or so, when we sat down to talk about what to improve, then we would also agree on what are the top 3 overall improvement areas or impediments, like top 3 impediments for us as a collective organization. And then we basically vote just top 3. And in the beginning, the things that came up there were, pretty concrete things like, we don't have a clear definition of done, right? Or we have too much technical debt, or very kind of tangible things, often quite easy to solve once you've agreed that it is a problem. So that was a useful tool for me as a coach, but also a way for the team to rally around. These are the things we're going to solve, and the rest we're not going to solve right now, so we don't need to worry about those, right? But what surprised me was after about 2 or 3 months of this, like we had solved the top few problems, and every time we solve a problem at the top, or at least solve it enough for it not to be the top 3, then the next problem below, bubbles up, right? So it's always a top 3. And suddenly at one meeting, one of the retrospectives, someone wrote a note that said, I think it was literally this, teams feel undervalued, unappreciated, and replaceable. Oh no, it said people feel unappreciated, undervalued, and replaceable. And that created this very kind of awkward silence in the room when this note came up. So it kind of made all the other notes seem kind of uninteresting in comparison. And we did an anonymous vote in the room to find out how many would agree with that statement. And it was just about everybody. So that became a big surprise also to everybody else, because it seemed kind of like people didn't realize that, oh, it's not only me. Other people are feeling like this too. Basically, this was a shit workplace, right? We're not happy here. So I started kind of poking around a little bit. Turned out that, like maybe about half of the people I talked to were actually looking for a new job or didn't really want to work there anymore. They'd kind of given up on it. So that was the elephant in the room. And it made all the other problems pale in comparison. And I had no idea what to do. I was kind of new to the role as coach, and I was kind of like, I don't know what to do about this. This is an icky problem. Give me something concrete. Like, we don't have a definition of done. Okay, we can solve that, right? Technical debt, that can be solved too. But this is trickier. So I did the only thing I could come up with, which was put it up on the wall on the list of top 3. So this was number 1 of the top 3. And it had everyone's initials on it next to it, kind of just to highlight it's something we all agree on. And then I walked around and I kind of grabbed various people in the building, like various managers, someone from HR, someone just kind of like, hey, come and check this out. This is the number 1 problem you have right now. And they were also equally surprised, like, what? People don't like to work here, right? So, it became this kind of crisis moment. And after that, I left for a while because I was going on vacation. So
see you.
It's kind of like drop the bomb, okay, your kitchen is on fire, good luck, bye-bye. And I had no idea what would happen. But actually, one thing I noticed before I left was that people started talking about it. So there would be like, managers would have one-on-ones with people. Little things started happening, like the product owner who started, of course, asking around what's bugging people. It turned out that a lot of people figured that there's no, we don't feel any connection to the product or the vision or, what you're doing or what we're doing. So he moved to the same floor as the team and started working much more closely, little things like that. But basically I was gone for most of that time after like maybe a couple of months. But when I came back, I was really surprised because, one more thing we also did though, we started measuring this. So we put up on the wall a chart, which basically said, how did it feel to go to work this week, roughly on average? Scale of 1 to 5. Like 5 is like, yoo-hoo. 1 is like, oh man, please make me not have to go to work. It was semi-anonymous. There was no names on it, but it was a chart on the wall. But I mean, you could put a note up without people seeing. So I figured it's anonymous enough, right? And we just charted that. So it was a scale of 1 to 5. How happy do you feel? Just how does it feel to go to work? And the average was like 2.3 or something. It was horrible. And the data was right there in everyone's face, right? But what's interesting is when I came back after a few months and I looked at that chart, it had gone up quite a lot. I think it was like maybe 3.5 or something like that. I think the trend was pretty clear. And I started asking people what happened. And they started telling me all these things they had done to solve the things that were bugging people. And it was really interesting because instead of being this silent problem that nobody was talking about and people just look for new jobs, I think what happened was maybe this kind of psychological conditioning that people were used to the top 3 things coming up on the wall, those get solved. That's why they're there, right? We solve them. So it changed from, oh no, this workplace sucks, I'm leaving. It changed from that to, oh, this is the top problem, we need to solve it. So we started talking about it. And a lot of the things, could actually be dealt with. One middle manager actually got moved because I think the manager above him realized that this person is contributing to the overall unhappiness. It just wasn't a very good manager, honestly. So things started happening, both small things and bigger things. And the difference was both measurable and noticeable. Like when I came into the team, if we fast forward yet another couple of months, it really felt like a different team. People were more open. They were more taking initiatives and they were joking around a lot more often. And I don't remember, I think they maybe lost 1 person or so, but generally the trend shifted. So I've never really seen something like that before. And then I came back after a year, just out of curiosity, like what, where did this go after a year? And to my surprise, they were still measuring happiness. Often those kind of metrics are useful just for a period and then people stop, right? But they kept doing it because they're like, this is useful. This triggers the right questions. So then I noticed that it went from 2.3 or whatever up to about 4, and then it kind of hovered there, a little bit down, a little bit up. It didn't quite go above, but it seemed like 4 was a pretty good place to be anyway. And the general mood was still pretty high. So yeah, that was a really interesting pivot, and that's when I realized that okay, this thing about happiness, it really matters, and you can do something about it.
Something I've taken away from talking to you and attending your courses and so on is that you say, don't motivate people, remove the demotivators.
Yeah.
Is that a correct
yeah,
quote?
I don't know whose quote is it's not mine. I stole it from somebody, but I think it's a good quote. People generally don't need to be motivated. Often they're surrounded with stuff that are bringing them down, and if you help them work together to remove the stuff that's bringing them down, that itself is motivating. Productivity is motivating, and teamwork is motivating in itself.
Yeah. So what I take away from that story is that just make it visual, make it apparent that you have problems, and then empower the team or the people to actually fix these demotivators.
It is in a sense, I'm a one-trick pony. It's this card I always pull out when I don't know what to do, which is just visualize the problem like really, really clearly. Then often good stuff happens, and if good stuff doesn't happen, then maybe you're in the wrong place.
So to the next question. Your story mentioned an organizational shift, perhaps focused on a few teams, but have you seen like large organizations shift in terms of happiness, and what were the kind of causes around that?
Not really. What I found in large organizations, it seems like there isn't a single level of happiness. In this case, there was in a sense a single level because it was just 3 teams working very closely together. So when they were all sad, right, and then most of them became happier. But when it's like 50 teams, I find that there's a lot of local variation. So there's no such thing, I think, for big company of what is the overall happiness of the company. It's more like, okay, over here, this project, that team, this department, that role, you'll see local variation.
And about 5 years ago, I started measuring happiness in the team that I was in at the time. And I got inspiration from an article, I think, by Jeff Sutherland, where he talked about the happiness metric. And he mentions you, or refers to you in the article, and he talks about the happiness index. So I was wondering, like, could you explain a bit about the history of the happiness index and how that came about?
Sure. Basically, I'm trying to remember what came first, but I think that the story I just told you was the first time I experimented with giving it a number, like an index. And somewhere around the same period, I think at Crisp, our company, right, we were kind of reevaluating what is the purpose of our company. We had gone through a bit of a pivot, and we wanted to clarify what is our success, what are our success metrics, right? How do we know if we're doing good? And we thought a little bit about why did we start the company? What's the purpose of it? How is it different from traditional consulting companies? And one insight we realized was that actually what's different is that in our company, our goal is to make us happy. And the customers are just like a necessary, part of the formula. So the customers are not the goal; they are a tool. But don't tell the customers I said that, all right? So
I'm not recording this. No.
Yeah, but basically, if we want to do a good job. We want to make our customers happy, but that's because that makes us happy. So the customer is a means to an end. We want to be profitable, not because of any growth target, but because if we're profitable, that gives us financial security, which means we can spend time doing stuff we feel like, and that makes us happy. So it all came down to kind of like, okay, our purpose is that we want to be happy. We want to create a place where consultants can be happy. So how do we know if we're succeeding? All the traditional metrics would then fail us. Looking at profitability and market segment or market growth, whatever, is not telling us if we're happy or not. So I suggested that why not just measure that, kind of like what we did there at that company. Let's just give it a number of scale of 1 to 5, and then do it continuously. Because we're somewhat distributed, we set up a Google spreadsheet. and just experimented with, we have all the names, and then there's a column, and just how happy are you at being at Crisp, or about being at Crisp, and scale of 1 to 5. 5 is I love it, yoo-hoo. 1 is, I want out, this is horrible. And because Crisp kind of is a fairly high trust place, people tend to be open and honest generally. So we didn't do this anonymously, because I felt that if people were angry or sad, they would normally be open about that. In some other companies I've been at, I maybe would have done it more anonymously, because I'd be afraid of people not being honest, right? So we kind of did that as an experiment. And what I noticed was that, this was useful, because it gave us an index. How are we doing, right? And it also helped us notice if we're on the wrong track. Because if, let's say, that maybe our average is good, but 3 or 4 people start moving down towards like 2 or 1, then that's a warning sign. And that almost inevitably means something else is wrong with our company. So it becomes like this canary bird in the coal mine, right? When that starts dying, then something's wrong. We got to do something. So when some scores start dipping down to 2 and 1, we have to do something. Maybe it's just help that person. Maybe they're sad for some reason, or maybe they're sad because of something wrong with Crisp, and then we need to fix that. So I just felt that this was useful, and we all agreed that let's keep this, because it's so lightweight, it's easy to do, it's just a spreadsheet. We update it kind of from time to time when needed. And anyway, and the connection to Jeff was that we worked together quite a lot, teaching Scrum courses at the time. I still do. So he came by and he noticed this happening, and he was curious about this happiness index. And I told him of the story behind it. And he got super inspired, and he decided to use it at his company too, and kind of spread it to others. So that's why he tends to refer to us when he talks about it.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned, but Jeff Sutherland is one of the people behind Scrum.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and he's the CEO or managing director of Scrum Inc.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. Thank you for that story. Another question. So what can you do as a leader in an organization? Leader could be, you're a product owner or a Scrum Master or marketing manager or what have you. What can you do to foster happier cultures in your surroundings, in your team, other than fixing the demotivators?
Yeah.
Do you have any tangible examples of like small things that you can do?
I think maybe as a starting point, just get some education around it. I mean, like grab a book. For example, I can recommend Dan Pink's book, Drive, which kind of summarizes a lot of research around what is it that distinguishes happy teams from not happy teams. But that book also, describes the actual tangible benefits you get from that, other than just having happy people. But for example, the main 3 points from that book that make teams happier are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So autonomy being the ability to be self-directed, to kind of choose how you want to work. And then purpose is having some high-level goal you're trying to fulfill. And mastery is just getting better at stuff. So if you kind of start by just getting the basic understanding of what are the main levers you can pull, right? So then you might avoid traps like, hey, let's introduce a monetary incentive scheme, or let's buy another ping pong table, or, these kind of like, sure, that's great, but it's not going to make it's not going to really get impact happiness. So yeah, read that and then do what it says. But I'm also a big fan. I already mentioned the visualization. So start by interviewing people. Find out what are the things, what are the demotivators.
Yeah.
And you'll start seeing patterns quite clearly.
Yeah.
So make that 3 list, right?
And it's something around that. I mean, you can use design thinking in organizations for just this purpose, right? So in design thinking, you have the problem space and the solution space. Like the problem space is all about gathering insights, and then using these insights to boil down into specific actions or solutions that address the problems, right? So you can have this experimental kind of attitude when it comes to happiness as well. Like it's a continuous process of experimenting and gathering insights around what is causing unhappiness. Henrik, we have tons of questions from the audience.
Right.
So should we jump in there?
Go ahead.
Okay, from Martin. Thank you, Martin. Hey, Henrik. How to foster team happiness across distributed teams?
So I guess no coincidence that question comes up during these times. When like almost everybody distributed. I would say it's very little difference. There are things you want to do with a distributed team to create a sense of teaminess. anyway. For example, at Mojang for Minecraft development, we create these virtual team rooms or task force rooms, we call them. So anybody working on a specific type of feature would be in the room for that feature, talking to other people that are also interested in that. But in the same way, you can have team rooms, but basically a place where you can be. It's a permanent video conference meeting, essentially, except that it's not a meeting. It's just a place to be. So people are sitting there and they're coding quietly, or they're chatting about something, or they're maybe having a meeting and trying to talk about something. If you create the basic environments like that, where teams can communicate effectively, that's how it's kind of is, I would say, the starting point. Because if your only point of communication is a Slack channel, and you never see each other and never talk, it's going to be hard to know how are people feeling, right, behind those words. But if you connect on a video, it might be like, hey, you look stressed, how are you, right? It's like that. Then it helps to, so I would say there's not much difference for a distributed team and a physical team. It's the same kinds of things you want to do. But for example, I like to inject a question into either the daily stand-up or a retrospective or other recurring meeting, which is the question, how are you? And not just like, how are you? I'm fine, but how are you actually? And kind of go around the table and just listen. That helps to remind people that this actually matters. And then also using some retrospective techniques, like I like to use something that I call the team health check. I wrote an article about it called the squad health check model. It's something we used to do at Spotify a lot. It's kind of like a 360. It's a workshop format where you basically in a team identify what's, how are we doing, what's working, what's not, how is our health as a team overall, both in terms of stress, general motivation, but also practical things like what's the health of our code base, are we getting the organizational support we need, can we release easily. To put all those things together, and part of it is, of course, motivation, and that gives you a nice big picture. And I found that if you look at that big picture and you start addressing the red lights as a team with support from management, then it's kind of motivation comes almost automatically, because people get really motivated when you start really sorting out, when they get a chance to sort out their issues.
Should we do the next one? Okay. Let's see here, and please go to slido.com, slido.com, and enter the code HAPKEY, HAPKEY, to post questions. Yeah, do that. Again, while he's grabbing a drink, I can just show you.
So what have we got?
I'll just show this QR code so everybody can see. See the screen all right? You can use that to ask questions to Henrik. All right, next one. Some in the team are introverts, silent, and some are rather talkative. How can I address that appropriately?
That's a great question, often overlooked.
Yeah.
I'll definitely put myself on the introvert side, even though I often end up on stages talking. I think definitely, first of all, acknowledge that. Maybe talk about it, because a lot of the rituals in society are kind of optimized for people that are extrovert. I'm a little bit hesitant of classifying people, but I find it useful to think of it as a kind of a continuum, that some people like me tend towards the introvert side. It's not black or white. It's just by default, I need some time alone to kind of recharge. Or for other people, it tends to be a little bit in another direction. They need to be with other people to recharge. So it varies, right? But acknowledge that, first of all. Maybe talk about it in the team. And if you're in a position where you facilitate or lead, then definitely keep this in mind when you are doing things like brainstorming or doing workshops. You might start just trying to notice. It's quite easy when you start thinking about it, like, wait a sec, who's talking here? And it's quite often always the same 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And you have the other 2 or 3 people that are quiet. It doesn't mean they're introvert necessarily, but it means you need to think about how do I get their voices heard? So it could be as simple as saying, hey, before we talk, let's all write some sticky notes with our thoughts. Or maybe even in advance, bring some stuff to talk about in text. So just create some silent space. Little things like that help quite a lot, I find. But also in the general workplace, it could be a good thing to talk about doing a retrospective. Like, okay, how do we feel, with respect to introversion and extroversion? How do we feel about our workplace right now? And maybe it'll turn out that, some people are like, well, it's great that some people are like, I love it because we're always talking. And other people are like, I hate it because we're always talking.
Right.
So then, okay, how can we create some space for not talking while also creating space for talking, right? And it's possible if you just put that question on the table and discuss it and then start experimenting.
Thank you. Another one, how can we make the team get excited about sharing how they feel? Especially on Slack when they rather have the camera off and not share their feelings. I mean,
yeah,
sign of the times, right?
It is. It's extra hard on text because stuff you write there sticks around. So it can be a little bit scary to write stuff there because maybe that text gets misused. Someone forwards it to someone else or something. So understandably, people are hesitant to really explain like personal things over text. I think to take into account is that some people, again, speaking of introversion, extroversion, some people find it really hard to be really open in front of other people, especially a group. So if that's the case, if you're, for example, in a position of leadership or coaching, maybe try to approach those people one-on-one. If you notice that there are people who don't seem to be wanting to be open about how they feel to the group, maybe just do a one-on-one version of it to try to find out. It's a lot about building trust, right? So if you create that context where people are willing to open up, it might take some time to earn that trust, but it's worth it, I find. But also, I think setting an example is very powerful. Like in a given team of, let's say, 6 people, if they're really quiet and tend to not talk about feelings, I'm willing to bet that it's actually several of them that would if they knew it was encouraged. And maybe there's a couple that are just shy and won't do it either way, right? But so one way to open them up is by just doing it yourself. Maybe, well, other than just doing it yourself, you can also have that as a standing agenda question. Like we're now gonna, question 1 on our retrospective is how are you when we go around the table, and now there's permission and time and space to talk about it. And then if you start by yourself and try to be as open as you can, then maybe others are willing to be open as well. But at the end of the day, yeah, you can't force people. You can just create an environment that at least encourages it.
And we got a question from Anonymous. Is it sometime necessary to change team setup, so team members, in order to go towards happier teams? Should we think of chemistry between members when we build the teams?
And that's a really interesting question. Sometimes it would appear that if we just throw this person out of the team will be happier. And sometimes that would be the correct assessment.
That's a demotivator.
But not always. So what I also find is sometimes we jump to conclusions. This person here appears to be a jerk, but actually they're just unhappy. They're not being heard or they're not being respected. And if you can create a context where they are heard and respected, and if they realize that others, disagree with them, you can create this environment of constructive feedback and open communication. Maybe the jerk suddenly isn't a jerk anymore. So give people the benefit of the doubt. I would say definitely start there, but also realize that sometimes people just are jerks. Maybe this person is really nice in some other context. Maybe they're not happy at this job, whatever it is. Maybe there's a personality clash. I don't know, but people are people and people are squishy and weird and we have brains and we're not logical. So sometimes there's going to be a simple fact that this person makes the rest of the team not happy. And in that case, it really boils down to a difficult trade-off of what is the purpose of this organization? Is the purpose to give everybody a job? Is the purpose to have everybody in the same team? Probably not. The purpose is probably something else, like ship the successful product or something. And in that case, we need to take this person off the team. It might be a matter of finding some other place for them in the company. Maybe they shouldn't be on a team. Maybe they should be sitting alone somewhere. Maybe that's even something that'll make them happier. Or maybe they need to be fired, which is sad, but sometimes necessary as well. But yeah, I have seen some teams that are stuck because there's one person who brings everyone else down, and they can be stuck for a long time. In fact, a concrete example was I was CTO at a company when I wrote that book, Scrum and X3 from the Trenches. I was CTO, and one team I saw was suffering from this. One person was kind of dominating. All decisions had to be made through that person. He was very technically senior, but also very blunt. So whenever someone disagreed with him, he would kind of shoot them down. So the team was kind of quiet, and he would be the person who kind of making all the decisions. But it seemed like they were kind of being suppressed, right, as a team. And I tried to kind of coach him a little bit, but I couldn't really make a difference. But I was too chicken to do something about it, really. I was pretty junior as a manager. But then later on, when I left, another manager came after me. And one of the first things he did was fire that person. I was like, whoa, that was gutsy. And of course, everyone on the team was like, oh no, how are we going to manage now? This guy's gone. How are we, we're dependent on him. He knows all the systems. Well, guess why he knows all the systems, right? Because he's not letting anyone else learn. So when he left, suddenly the team started stepping up in a really clear way. They started learning, started helping each other. And they were really clearly more productive and more happy when this person was gone. So it just took a manager who had the courage to just do that. But it's hard.
Another one. Let's try to decipher this one. Let's see. What's a good way for a team leader to share her nirvana when it comes to happy teams with the team and have that as part of way of working discussion?
Oh, I would be a bit hesitant of even doing that because you don't want to impose your personal nirvana on a team, right? So I would probably take that. And in fact, I'm doing that right now with my team. We do what I call a definition of awesome kind of exercise. We just sit down and all of us share what is our personal nirvanas, pretty much, if that's what the question meant, both as an individual, but also as a team. What is a perfect team in a perfect world? And then we kind of throw sticky notes at it and we compare. And we may notice places where we think different. Maybe we're like, oh, like the introvert extrovert thing may come up there. I'm like, the perfect team is where we all work together and, really collaborate all the time. And someone else is like, perfect team is where I get to work in peace and quiet and not be disturbed all the time, right? So now we have a conflict. But if we can put all of our nirvana aspects on the table together, and then from that find what do we agree on, and let's make that true, or at least move in that direction. That's like super powerful. But ideally a team thing, and not just the leader.
And going back to my questions, let's see here. We'll grab one from the audience. So this is not particularly pertaining to happiness per se, but I guess it's pertaining to transparency. So Anna poses the question, how to make teams developers then like sharing progress, to share progress. So especially an issue for a PO when you need to understand what's going on. So how do you foster that, foster transparency?
That's really interesting because that also has two sides, like most things.
Yeah.
If a team is hesitant to share what they're doing and what's going on, that can be a number of reasons. And I would really want to go into the root cause before trying to fix the problem, right? The root cause could be that they don't even know that they're encouraged to do so. That's easily fixed. But sometimes the root cause is that the stuff they're being asked to share is the wrong information. It's not relevant. And therefore they feel it might be misused, or they feel it's not interesting. So for example, let's say someone is asking to know how many hours have you spent every day on each feature. That's just waste. That's not, in most cases, that's not really useful information. What are you going to do with that information? And it's often going to be hard to define anyway. If I'm pairing with you on something, am I technically working on that task or something else? So it typically doesn't generate motivation or interest in a team to measure something like that. So I'll start by looking at what information is it I'm trying to get this team to be transparent about, and why? What am I going to use it for? And in most cases, most teams I work with, it really boils down to the useful stuff is, what is our current focus? What problem are we trying to solve? And at a high level, what are we working on? Just, roughly, right? I'm working on this, you're working on that, because that makes it easier to collaborate. The difference is, however, who's working on what stuff, that's only useful really internally in the team. While what is our high level focus as a team, that's useful for stakeholders outside. So I would probably separate those two and say, okay, how do we present this information? Where do we put it? How do we make it visible? The external stakeholders should not have to go to the team's board and read all the tasks and who's working on what in detail. That's just waste for them. And it also creates a sense of micromanagement for the team. I can give an example. With Minecraft development, we have 3 teams right now. We split it across 3 teams. Each team has their own task board, which they use every day to synchronize who's working on what. But then we have a shared board, which we call the dashboard, which is how is the game progressing towards our next release at a high level. So we can see which features are we planning to put into the next release, which subset of all features is part of what we call the minimum lovable product. Like without this, we don't even have a good release. And what's the status per platform? Like, are we prototyping this, or are we in some kind of implementation, or have we already shipped this and we're iterating and improving? So it's just information. And then where do we have problems right now? Are we blocked anywhere? Are there any dependency issues? And then a similar board for technology, like what enabling technologies do we need in order to deliver the minimum lovable product, and which of that work is started or finished. So it's not very personal. You don't see a lot of names up there, but you see what is it we're working on, what is the focus. That's really useful both for us and for our external stakeholders. So that's what they look at, and that's what they care about. And because all the teams find that information useful, they're motivated to want to keep it up to date, because when it gets out of date, they notice that they start getting misaligned. So yeah, in summary, I would say find out what information matters and to whom, and then optimize the information for that audience. And then if you do that, people tend to almost by themselves want to keep that information up to date.
Yeah. And going back to what you talked about earlier, to have one-on-ones with people, like have one-on-ones with managers and team members to understand like what information is important to you, and to use that.
Yeah, and sometimes if someone is asking for information that seems kind of like dumb, like why are you asking for an exact estimate of what's going to be shipped in a year? Obviously, we don't know. Or maybe they're asking for time reports, right, or something. It's like, might feel like nonsense. So you might just be tempted to just say, go away, right? But when someone is asking something, there is an unfulfilled need somewhere. So I like them to just take that as a trigger for a one-on-one and just find out what is the problem they're trying to solve. And they might find something better to give them that wasn't what they asked for originally.
Right. So just a question on the fly, but so we talked about happiness, and we talked about teams and so on, but let's say I work with HR. So I'm an HR manager of a larger organization. And to use this continuous improvement mindset, like we talked about, how should I go about to be more agile in the way I view HR? I mean, this is a big topic, and sorry for dropping that, but I think it's interesting to explore, because I think HR is such a big part of organizational change, right?
And HR can really help or hinder
the
motivation of an organization. So I would look at, I've worked quite a lot with HR, and sometimes their feedback loops are too long. And that makes anything hard. It's like if you're driving a car and you turn the steering wheel, and then the wheels turn 30 seconds later, you're going to crash. Right? We need fast feedback, right?
Yeah.
So if their only means of kind of follow up is the yearly employee satisfaction survey or whatever, then they're basically flying blind, and then they tend to introduce lots of policy that is well intended but just messes things up. So find ways to speed up that feedback. Do surveys more often, for example, or follow up with one-on-ones, or add basic visualizations, such as, let's say every team is encouraged to share what their top 3 impediments are, or the top 3 things that are bringing them down. They're encouraged to share that. And it doesn't have to be personal. It doesn't have to say a name on it, right? But it at least can give a pattern. And if that gets aggregated across multiple teams, then you can look at the big picture and say, okay, in general, people are stressed. That seems to be a big problem. They're stressed and they're being encouraged to take shortcuts, and that's causing quality problems, which is causing more stress. If you got that picture, then you can start getting more zoom in on that and say, okay, let's find out where the stress is the most, and let's talk to those managers and find out how we can support that manager in supporting their teams. So that might be one kind of way of HR to kind of steer their focus in the right direction.
Excellent. We got a few more questions by Anonymous. How to set long-term goals for happy teams, and how to combine it with individual development, performance, and recognition. So questions regarding the longer-term goals for teams regarding development and performance and recognition. So the kind of big big
That's a lot.
question, but we can dissect it
Yeah,
together.
Let's dissect it. Let's split it into separate questions. Any
Yeah.
suggestions?
So long-term goals in terms of individual development. So you're a manager, and setting long-term goals together with a team member.
Right.
What's your experience in successful ways of doing that?
I haven't seen very many, honestly. It seems like
Okay.
a tricky thing to do.
Yeah.
Individual goals have this tendency to cause sub-optimization. When you have it, especially when they get real, like, you know, if you don't achieve this goal, it might have an impact on your salary, things like that. So I'm a little bit burned by that, but I also recognize that there's a need sometimes for an individual to have some kind of a plan, like where do I want to go? When I found that it works well, that's when it's done quite informally. So as a manager, asking a team member, where do you want to be in a year personally, right? Just asking that and maybe following up every quarter. So it could be as simple as, I want to learn more programming languages. Or I want to become a leader, or I want to move more towards product design. So every person has their kind of like where they want to be. And ideally they would share that with their team, but sometimes they maybe don't want to, so I wouldn't force it. But ideally, if everyone on the team knows what everyone else wants, they can help each other achieve it, right? But yeah, if having that kind of conversation with your manager and then a follow-up, but not making it formal, like, oh, you didn't achieve your goals now, you know, you're going to get punished for that. That's when it starts down.
Yeah, I mean, just to spin off what you just said, I mean, I think a colleague of ours from CRISP posted a blog post about just visualizing a matrix of the different skills in a team to understand where there are gaps. And let's say, you know, in product design, I'm pretty low, but if you just visualize that in a matrix on a whiteboard or whatever, maybe some other team member says like, oh, but I can help you if you want to learn that. And there's
I really like that approach a lot, because I use it fairly regularly with teams, especially new teams, because we tend to get pigeonholed, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you got hired as a backend developer, and you got hired as a designer, and then we have this stamped in our head like designer, right? But when you get in that workshop setting and you nuance that, and so you have these two dimensions, right? All the different kind of key skill sets needed to build this product, and the names down here. And then you have like star could be like, this is what I'm good at. This is my main thing. You can have several stars. But then a dot could be, I'm actually okay at this. I'm not great at it, but I'm okay at it. So I'm a designer, but I can actually write code, maybe, right? Or I'm a tester, but I can actually blah. So everyone is, you know, there's something you're good at, maybe some things that you can kind of do a little bit. And then maybe an arrow pointing up in places which is, I would like to learn this. I would like to get better. So maybe you have an empty cell with an arrow means, I don't know how testing, but I would love to learn more, right? And so sometimes you have a star and an up arrow. I'm really good at this and I want to get better, right? So when you look at this picture, both of what are people good at now and what do they want to get better at, it creates this much more useful, you know, view of the team, and often surprises. Like, we just learned recently that a lot of people in the Minecraft team that do technical development are actually interested in design. And sometimes design, I work as a designer there, sometimes we become bottlenecks. So now we're using them. So we're creating cross-functional design teams with people that normally, it doesn't say design on their CV, right? But they're interested in it and they're motivated and they learn fast. So now we have design teams with people that actually aren't formally designers, but they're doing it and they're doing a great job and they're learning. And that kind of creates a more like load balancing factor across the team. Plus, it also means they make better decisions from a technical perspective and they're also involved in the design. So yeah, very interesting.
Another question, how to deal with team members with their walls built up high? We kind of touched upon that earlier, but like if you have a...
I assume we mean like metaphorical walls.
Metaphorical, not like a Minecraft.
Yeah, otherwise it's easy.
Right. But I think you get the sense of the question.
Yeah.
Like
so basically, they don't want to collaborate. Is that kind of thing we're talking about?
Yeah. They don't want to collaborate. They're closed. They're
I guess
not very communicative.
I don't have any universal answer for that, but I have an example which kind of had a big impact on me because I think it's a typical example. I had one team, like Scrum is kind of oriented around the assumption that everyone is collaborative. And Scrum tends to foster that kind of naturally. So people who are otherwise maybe more individualistic tend to become more collaborative in a Scrum environment because we have the visualizations and the daily meetings. So in that sense, it tends to sort itself out over time automatically. But sometimes there's going to be, like in this one team I worked in, there was one person who just was very, very, very shy. So he barely talked to anybody during the day. He just sat and coded, but he was good at it, right? And then during the daily meetings, he found those very, very uncomfortable. When it was his turn, you can see he's really suffering. He doesn't want to talk to especially to everybody. So I kind of followed up with him a little bit. And then one of the other team members who knew him kind of well also followed up with him because they had some trust. And finally, we came up with an experiment because we realized we have to be able to collaborate with him because he's part of a team. He's not building his own little product. And the team likes him. I mean, sometimes to be cynical, sometimes it may be better to not have that person on the team if they're not even trying to collaborate. But in this case, he was contributing in his own way. He just wasn't communicating so much. So we finally tried an experiment, which was that at the daily stand-up, his buddy, like let's say his name was Frederick, his buddy Frederick would speak for him. So during the daily stand-up, we would do this round robin, who's doing what right now and today, and what are we working on. And then Frederick would speak for himself and for the other guy. Say, I'm doing this today, and he's doing that today. Which may seem like, what? Isn't that like push? Isn't that micromanagement? But no, this is adapting to a problem we had. And this made everybody happy, including the quiet guy, because then he didn't have to talk to everybody. And he actually preferred being handed a task, ideally a tricky, difficult, complex task, right? So that worked, right? Frederick would find a complex, difficult technical task and put it on a table and say, go. And he would sit there quietly and he would nail it. So I don't think you can have a whole team with people like that. That's really hard, but just a few, it can be, we want cross-functional teams are good, right? And this is one part of cross-functionality is having these different personality types and making the best of them.
Excellent, thank you. What's your advice for a product owner who's new to a team and the team probably doesn't trust him or her? So going back to the trust thing.
Yeah, trust is hard because trust is earned, right? That's a really good question.
Is there something around vulnerability? Like to show that you're vulnerable and you're open to feedback?
I'm kind of curious about your answer to that.
I would go with vulnerability and just openness and just show that your human side. And it's difficult to pinpoint exactly, but I think, in a meeting setting or in a workshop, just to try to speak from where you are, like being really honest about something. It could be an issue in the workshop or an idea or whatever, but I think people in the team pick up on that, and they see the nonverbal communication and they hear the verbal communication, and they will appreciate somebody who speaks openly about something. Yeah. And I think that could be
ask the team, like, how can I earn your trust? Matthew.
Yeah. And even simpler answer, I would say. And I think that's true. I mean, you can just ask the team and be open, right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to think about also, why do they maybe not trust me? Is it just because I'm new and they don't know yet? That may solve itself over time. If you just continue trying to do a good job, then maybe you'll just earn the trust. But sometimes it may be for good reason. Maybe they don't trust that you actually know what you're doing. As a product owner, you're supposed to be somewhat of a domain expert, someone who can really make the tough decisions about a product. Maybe they feel you don't have the skill for that. So you need to think about, wait a sec, do I feel I have the right skill for that? Maybe I'm kind of new at the job. Maybe there's people in the team who actually have a better domain knowledge. So kind of be really honest with yourself. Do I trust myself? Mm-hmm. And if not, then maybe be open with the team and say, you know what, several of you people here have a lot more domain knowledge than me. So I'm not going to be the one making the big decisions here. I'm going to be the one making sure we as a team make the best decisions together. And I'll be using you guys a lot because a lot of you know more than me. So then you're both exposing your vulnerability and you're kind of mobilizing them to help you. And then they might trust you because when they notice you being honest about your maybe lack of skill, they might trust you more, ironically, which is interesting. Yeah. But the worst thing is somebody who comes in and speaks boldly and they don't know what the heck they're talking about, right? So that has to shine through.
Connecting to what you just said, also like exercising around goal setting and to foster something together as a team. All right. So what problems do we want to solve with this product or service
Yeah.
or this part of the organization? How do we measure that we're tracking towards progress and just having a common understanding within the team relating to where we want to go as a team? I think that could also be a solution to the trust issues, like fostering the team culture rather than the individual trust of a person, right?
I find that transparency helps also. Like if I'm making decisions and the team doesn't really know me or trust me, if I tend to over index on transparency. So this is what I'm planning to do right now, and this is why. And just make it really visible all the time. So they can ask questions or voice concerns, but also they might notice after a while that, okay, he seems to have a plan. Or I may not agree with what he's doing, but now I understand the reason why he's doing it. Things like that.
So let me see if we have more questions here. I mean, this one, I'll take a question from the audience and tweak it. I have the power to do so. But just the notion of happiness, right? And it's quite foreign to certain organizations to talk about happiness, because you talk about engagement or performance or things like that. So just talking about happiness is a big shift to traditional companies. And so let's say you're a team member in a team and you want to bring up happiness within the organization. What would be some tips to this person who want to talk more broadly and openly about happiness in a bigger context? So tough question, sorry, but
tough one. But I guess I often tend to dodge tough questions by answering with examples, because but like sometimes just making stuff visible again, like that company I mentioned earlier where we started measuring happiness, they weren't talking about happiness before, really. But then once we started measuring it and making it visible, and it suddenly became the elephant in the room became visible. So sometimes that may be if you think happiness may be an issue, can you in some way find a way to quantify that or make that visible? Then that might force the conversation to start happening. Another thing to do is just try, right? Start with just one or two people that you trust and have a discussion about it. Maybe it'll start spreading. I want to mention one kind of insight I've had along the way. In the past, I used to believe that this thing about happiness and productivity, right? That positive feedback loop, right? Happier teams tend to be more productive, and when they get more productive, they get happier, right? It's a positive loop. I used to think this was mostly for knowledge work. And I'm like, if your job is to pile bricks or something more manual, maybe it's not going to have as big effect. You know, this guy's sad, but I don't care because he's strong. So just load bricks and shut up, right? I don't know. Maybe that works. But I have 4 kids at home, so I get some chance to experiment with these things. And I've noticed something very interesting. Even when we're doing pure manual labor, it can be something like we got to clear, branches and junk from our garden, right? A few hours of just manual work, kind of boring. That work can take half an hour or 3 hours, depending on how happy the team is at that moment. If they're motivated, we're having some fun, we put on some music, they understand why we're doing what we're doing, we're celebrating along the way, we're measuring progress, right? We're stopping once in a while to talk about, hey, does anyone find a good trick for how to, yank weeds, right? Little things. Suddenly we're just working really, really fast and getting stuff done and having fun along the way, even though it's just manual labor. So yeah, I've kind of learned just by experimentation that this thing is not specific to knowledge work in any way.
Great. I'll take away that I'll experiment on my children moving forward as well regarding happiness.
Next time I'm going to try to have them really, really sad.
So we're running out of time, but just a classic question. So what question haven't we asked that we should have asked during this fireside chat as kind of the finale of this hour?
That's kind of interesting. I guess maybe one question is if happiness doesn't matter, what does matter, right? Find out what the company is measuring and why.
Yeah,
that's one. And also maybe I'd say generally root cause, like, if people aren't talking about happiness or they feel that they can't, find out why. Maybe what are the reasons?
Dig deep. All right, should we conclude? So just thank you so much, Henrik. This has been a lovely chat and so insightful to hear your perspective. And thank you to the audience who posed questions. And we will be in touch. We will have future fireside chats.
Our fire stopped burning. No, it's still a little bit there. We're still a little bit there. That's cool.
A little bit there. And if you have any questions, you can email marcus@hapkey.io or visit hapkey.io if you want to learn more about our product. So with that said, have a fantastic afternoon or morning or wherever wherever you are on this planet. And again, thank you, Henrik. This was amazing.
Enjoyed it a lot. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.